But can I just add a little more and some stuff you haven't heard about the Kimberley Kitching situation? Our mate, of course, died last week. We were on the air as that news was breaking. And our hearts are obviously still very heavy that this really nice lady is not going to be with us. And that, of course, is a huge tragedy to her family, and it is a major loss to the Labor Party. But let's deal with, well, let's take the gloves off and let's start telling the truth. There are moments in politics that actually show us the true person. Now, we have spent the past 3 years with the Labor Party effectively finding its popularity by trying to pretend that they will be Hawke and Howard and Rudd and everyone else, and trying to tell us that the heart of the Prime Minister is black, that the Prime Minister doesn't care about what happens to women in Parliament House, that he doesn't care about fires and floods, and all of that, of course, is garbage. But if you say it enough and the media catches on, then eventually that starts to be the prevailing narrative. It's why I talk so often on this show about narratives, that it's not just about the news of the day, it's about how you can just keep putting straws on the back of something until it eventually breaks. Well, I want to show you the reality of the bloke who, if the polls are right, could be the next Prime Minister of Australia. Now, he, like the Prime Minister, stood and spoke about the problems that had happened in Parliament House for the past couple of years. He's proud of this speech. It still sits on his website. This is how you can find the video on his website, where he says these two things. Roll the tape.
We owe a debt of gratitude to everyone in this building, as well as every former staff member who stepped up to share their experiences of workplace bullying. I also acknowledge particularly the women who bravely stood up and called out a culture of mistreatment that brought this issue into the light. We must, to put it simply, walk the talk.
The last bit is the insight into the reality of the bloke. That when he stands there all soft-voiced and full of emotion, thinking that all of this is great because it's bad for the other guy, remember what he said at the end of what I just showed you.
We must, to put it simply, walk the talk.
So, as you know, the story comes out today. Some reporting on it was there from Troy Bramston, and then the deeper news version with much more detail on top of all of that picture comes from Sharri Markson today. Again, she's on the show. And she explains the types of treatment that Kimberley Kitching received from people while working in that building.
In the last 2 years of Kimberley Kitching's life, she was under strain and quite severe political stress. In part, this came because she was frozen out of many of the roles that she loved dearly by her own Labor colleagues. She was ostracised and she was upset about it. And a lot of people knew about this. This isn't something that the Labor Party can sweep under the carpet or cover up, as Anthony Albanese has tried to do today, because too many people know about how she was treated. Well, this was an issue, again, she tried to fix, she tried to remedy, she made complaints about while she was alive, and it was never resolved. No one stood up for her. So I think we've seen a very hypocritical response today. It's been very upsetting for her close friends how Anthony Albanese has handled this.
Now, let's be very clear. I'm not suggesting or inferring, and not because a lawyer told me, but because it's very obvious. I'm not suggesting that the Mean Girls treatment is linked to her death. No one's saying that. But we have been given an insight into the behaviour that goes on at the top end of power of Labor. Now, Senator Kitching, according to Sharri's reporting, made complaints about this behaviour, not to staffers, not to backbenchers, but to the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party, Richard Marles. Anthony Albanese today pretended he had never heard any of these things. So does that mean that he was being kept away from these issues by his Deputy Leader, or his Deputy Leader knew you don't raise these issues? Again, what did Anthony Albanese say when talking about bullying in Parliament House?
We must, to put it simply, walk the talk.
But today, rather than actually dealing with the substance of the story as you have seen, he pretended to be offended by the term used by the senator about the behaviour of half of the Labor leadership team, the two people who run the Labor Party in the upper house. The person who would end up in charge of our borders in Christina Keneally, who's the Deputy Senate Leader, and the person who would end up as the Foreign Minister of the country, Penny Wong. This was his indignant nonsense that was about trying to force the media not to report this story today.
I find it astonishing that in 2022, I get a question using the term mean girls. I find that extraordinarily disrespectful to describe strong, articulate, principled women.
Forgive me, boss, and sorry, mum. That's bullshit. You know it and I know it. He worked out that this was the way to respond to the story, knowing that most of the media, if they had to cover it, would run that as the story, as opposed to Michael Danby, a former Labor colleague and friend for 30 years, who was willing to go public today on the allegations of what the treatment was. Now, also, there was some questioning today, and credit to her. Alison Langdon on the Today Show today, she did ask Anthony Albanese about this, but watch his tactic, knowing that this isn't just about the live interview, but it's about making sure that the media thinks there's something a bit weird, a bit strange, a bit not okay about discussing this, and offering as little as he could to make sure that that grab didn't turn up on the 6 p.m. news.
Were you aware of a problem between Penny Wong, Christine Keneally and the late Kimberley Kitching?
Ali, look, Kimberley Kitching's passing is a tragedy, and it's something that's hurt all of the Labor family. And out of respect for Kimberley, I think the idea that people go into who might have had a disagreement here or there is totally unbecoming.
OK, then can I broaden that and ask you, is there a cultural problem with senior women within the ALP?
No.
Not that you're aware of?
No. No.
Well, if he's not aware of it, then his deputy didn't tell him, because that's exactly what was happening with senior women in the Labor Party. And he goes into the Parliament and tells everyone that we have to walk the talk. There are moments where you get to see the priorities of people who choose or put their hand up to lead us. Now, when asked a little more about this today, well, of course, out of respect, there was no way that there should be an investigation into this situation.
Were you aware of there being an issue, and is this something you're now going to look into?
No, Ali. I'm going to pay respect to Kimberley Kitching by treating her with the respect that she deserves. She made a contribution for too short a time.
This is a despicable tactic. Make no mistake, this is a despicable tactic, and one that would not have been acceptable if all of this was, of course, on the other side of Parliament. But I'm sad to say that that tactic worked with parts of the media. There was no mention of this on the 7 p.m. news on the ABC tonight. There was no mention of it tonight in an hour-long news bulletin on Channel 9. If I'm wrong, I'll gladly correct myself. Thankfully, there was a bit on Channel 10 and a bit on Channel 7, and I'll get to that in a second. But while she is offering no comment today, Christina Keneally was asked a version of this yesterday when she was here on this very channel.
While some of the assertions that have been made are not true, while the assertions that are being put don't tell a full story, I just don't believe, Karen, that this is the time, given the recent death of our colleague, given the fact that so many people are in shock or in mourning, that we should be, having an argument or a dispute about these assertions. I think out of respect for Kimberley and her family, who are in mourning, that is not an issue or an argument I'm going to engage in.
Sky News has reached out, but no further comment apart from that, where you may notice, despite the denials, it's not the full story. As for Penny Wong, she was doorstopped by Stella Todorovic from Channel 10 while I think she was in Adelaide today.
There have been some accusations that yourself and some of your Labor Senator colleagues were mean girls, mistreated or even bullied the late Senator Kimberley Kitching. What was your relationship with her and what's your response to that?
I've seen those reports, and I just want to say this. Senator Kitching has passed away. That was tragic and shocking, and many in the Labor family are grieving and her loved ones are grieving. So I'm simply not going to engage in commentary about some of the allegations which have been raised, even if I and others disagree with them.
Senator, will you attend Kimberley Kitching's funeral?
I will look at whether I can. I currently have an engagement in the Northern Territory with some First Nations communities.
Should the leader attend as well?
Well, this is, I really think there is politics and there is humanity.
Now, we have gone through a reckoning of recent years about how people should be treated in the workplace. It's painful, it's difficult, but we needed to have it. But you've just seen the tactic that meant that much of that conversation was about weaponising an issue to change the demographics of an upcoming election. Now, is this a story that should dominate every day between now and the election? No. But is it an insight into just truly how committed the alternative Prime Minister was to walking the talk? Yes. Is it an example of how you manage the media by making something seem too hot to handle, when other things that have happened in Canberra were not considered too hot to handle? They were considered something to forensically investigate, both in question time and in the media. Thankfully, there was reporting at 6 p.m. tonight, and I want to give due credit to Mark Riley, whose package was about this tonight. Not about polls in Western Australia. This was the main story in politics today. He reported and he made these interesting comments when talking to the newsreader after it.
While Anthony Albanese's indignation is understandable, these allegations are coming from people within his own party and Kimberley Kitching's close friends. In terms of electoral implications, well, Labor claims to have the superior position on issues of equality, but this raises serious questions about its own internal culture, and not the treatment of women by men, but how women treat other women. So while Labor's slamming the government, perhaps it should take some time to look in the mirror at itself.
Correct, but unless the media is willing to actually follow this up, and I guarantee you that the extreme majority of the media will have no interest in following this up tomorrow or the next day. They will simply move to whatever the confected outrage is of the next day, because it, of course, destroys the narrative that one side is black-hearted and one side walks on water. Now, again, there's form on this, on completely unrelated yet important things here. I want you to see that, remember, at the time when the culture of Parliament House was the dominant story that moved thousands of people to march around the country and became a lightning moment that may well determine the future of the election, there were brave women willing to say there's a problem in all parties. There were women who came forward in a closed Facebook group who were Labor staffers. And they said some of the following things. I apologise for some of the language in this, but these were their claims about the men in the Labor Party, both MPs and staffers that they have worked with. He is a man who punches the wall next to his female staffer's head, calling her when she passes on news he doesn't want to hear. Another one. He is a married man who plied a young woman with drinks until she had no idea what was happening. He promised others at the gathering he would get her home safely. Before putting her in a cab, he had sex with her when she had no ability to consent. The next day, he texted to demand that she take the morning after pill and blamed her for what happened, saying she was so drunk that she came on to him, and he threatened her to tell no one. One more here. He is a man who is some 40 years my senior, groped and tried to stick his tongue down my throat in a lift at work. Not one person lost their job. Not one person. The media did zero follow-up on those allegations because, of course, it wasn't the narrative. So if we really did have a national reckoning, it would be a pox on all the parties and a problem with the whole House. But all of those complaints disappear. Instead, this was the reaction at the time from Anthony Albanese, who, by the way, after hearing all of that, still was willing to embrace those that were marching outside pretending that all of this was only one side of politics.
But I certainly have read what has said, and it is of real concern. Women need to feel safe in every workplace and indeed in every part of society. And what we need to do is to make sure we listen to those concerns and respond.
But they didn't. They didn't listen, they didn't respond, and no one lost their job. And the media didn't care. Just like Channel 2 and Channel 9 in their news bulletins didn't care either. What was it that the Alternative Prime Minister said just this year about bullying in the workplace?
We owe a debt of gratitude to everyone in this building, as well as every former staff member who stepped up to share their experiences of workplace bullying. We must, to put it simply, walk the talk.
Unless, of course, you're a Labor person where let's just keep it on Facebook. Or if you're a senator, let's focus on the term she used, not the behaviour of which she was describing.